What if I told you that President Biden and the Biden administration have a plan in order to tame inflation? Would you be happy to hear that, or would you be a little bit concerned? Well, according to multiple reports, millions of Americans are now worried. But why? Well, it's because of how President Biden plans to tame inflation. What he is calling the biggest reason, the biggest contributor to inflation over the past few years. And it has to do with the cost of your home, of your rent. Just look at this. According to AP News, it says Biden to call for 5% cap on the annual rent increases as he tries to show plans to tame inflation. Here's what I can tell you. When President Biden first gave his speech, okay, he was talking just last week, and he came out and said that he is going to actually bring an end to the increases that we see on rent. He pretty much announced nationwide rent control. What was interesting about that is that same day I did a video to put on TikTok. TikTok actually banned that video. They wouldn't allow it. What I thought was interesting is we come here and we talk about what President Biden was just proposing. Again, it was early because he hasn't officially proposed it. That's supposed to happen today. But I thought it was interesting that they blocked it. Now today I want to talk about this 5% cap on annual rent increases, because if you are a landlord, this is going to impact you. If you are a tenant, this is going to impact you. Or let's say you are a homeowner and you are not a tenant or a landlord, it's still going to impact you, and I will explain why in just a moment. So you want to stick around and watch this entire video, and I'll explain exactly what is going on, because I can tell you right now, it is somewhat frustrating. But I'll get to that in just a moment. All I ask is one thing. It takes 2 seconds. Go ahead, hit that like button if you enjoy these daily updates. And now, let's begin. So again, President Biden is calling for a 5% cap on the annual rent increases. Now, I want to talk about this, okay? I want to read you a little bit of this article from AP News, but at the same time, I bring up one other question. If President Biden is trying to tame inflation, how come we have stories like this, where State Farm is seeking a massive rate hike in California as state's insurance crisis escalates? This is California's biggest insurer is weighing its future in the state. Do you know how much State Farm is planning to raise rates? Well, I did a video on this just last week, and I said this. In a filing to the California Department of Insurance, the company's subsidiary in the state requested to hike homeowners' insurance policies by 30%, condo policies by 36%, and renters' policies by a whopping 52%. So while President Biden is trying to tame inflation by making sure there's a cap on your monthly rent, we are now getting reports like this that State Farm is trying to raise rates by as much as 52%. Okay? They are not the only company looking to do that. We also have Allstate looking to raise California homeowners insurance premiums by an average of 34% per year. Yeah, that's where we're at. And if you think it's just, oh, it's only California, no big deal. Well, look at this. Florida's state-created property insurance company voted to raise homeowners insurance rates by 14%. Says homeowners insurance companies lost just over $21 billion last year. This has to do with things like hurricanes in Florida, okay, fires in California. Okay, we don't have hurricanes, but we do have some very interesting weather recently. Okay, flooding in the state of California. We've seen flooding in Nevada. We've seen hailstorms. We've seen tornadoes. Okay, and again, this is over in the Midwest, but not necessarily California. But again, all throughout the United States, we are now seeing that because of our climate changing, we are now seeing that we are being impacted because of water and fire and wind and hail, right? Rain. All this stuff is impacting us. Well, That's the reason why these insurance companies are coming out and saying that we need more money. We need to hike rates by as much as 52%. But at the same time, President Biden says, no, we are going to put a cap on rents at just 5%. That's what's interesting about this, is how can a landlord, how can they see an increase? Okay, let's just say it's California, for example. Okay, let's just say you are a renter. Okay, now you are a renter, but the landlord, they have their homeowner's insurance, right? So their homeowner's insurance increases by 30%. All right. But as the tenant, who that landlord would then push the responsibility over to, that, okay, well, my homeowner's insurance policy just went up by 30%. So guess what? You got to pay that increase. It's going to be more than a 5% increase in many cases. Okay, in many cases, it's going to be more than 5%. Okay, just keep that in mind. That's where things get interesting, is how can we increase homeowners insurance, condo insurance, renters insurance at 52%, but yet we are going to put a cap on rents at just 5%. Some are saying this is a political stunt. This is just rhetoric. Look at this. It says President Joe Biden is ready to propose a 5% cap on annual rent increases for tenants of major landlords as he tries to show he's doing something about the high cost of housing. It says, but the plan would require solid Democratic control of Congress to become law. Additionally, most policymakers have said that the best way to limit housing costs would be through more construction and changes to land use regulation. One of the things that people are doing around the United States, Washington State is one of those as well, is they do ADUs. Okay, and by having an ADU, an additional dwelling on the property, and they take let's say a garage or could even be a shed, and they convert it into an apartment. Right, put it just a single room, has a kitchen, has a bathroom, everything works. It's an additional dwelling on that property. Well, they've started to change the regulations to allow that a little bit more often. Okay, great. Now we have additional housing. That's going to bring costs down, not by putting a cap on the cost. Keep reading. President Biden says it's time to get things back in order a little bit. If I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase. Here's what I think is interesting. The median national rent was $1,411 back in June. That was last month. It's up from $1,150 back in early 2021. Obviously, because of things getting shut down, there were some cost issues. There were a lot of places that couldn't get parts and stuff to fix any type of unit or even build. Lumber was so expensive. Well, now it's starting to come back down. So it should be easier to build, right? Well, now we have more regulation. It says half of renters were cost burdened because they spend more than 30% of their income on housing and utilities. This is according to a recent survey, a recent report by Harvard University. It says in recent months, housing has been a primary contributor to keeping the consumer price index, which is CPI or inflation, elevated at 3% annually. Goes on to say this is not going to create a single unit of housing by putting a cap of 5%. It's not, which is what is needed to create more housing opportunities for Americans. This is really a campaign-driven piece of rhetoric. Now, what does that mean? Well, the quality of housing suffers. If you put a 5% cap, but yet your costs as a landlord are increasing, you're probably not going to go and fix the dishwasher when it breaks down. You're probably not going to go and clean all the carpets as much as you should. You're probably not going to paint before a new tenant comes in. It's just what you're not going to do. Why would you go and spend $20,000 to fix up an apartment when maybe that apartment's only going to bring you in, a few $1,000s for that year? Then now people are going to be talking about, well, these people are slumlords. But at the end, they're in it to make a profit. So we're going to see what happens moving forward. The only thing I can tell you right now is it will be interesting to see whether or not this is something that actually moves forward. But in order for this to move forward, Democrats will need more control in the House. They will need more control in the Senate, which right now they do have the majority, but that might go away in this upcoming election. And they need to have President Biden or some Democrat in charge of the Oval Office. So we're going to see what happens moving forward. All I can tell you right now is I will be here every step of the way, and I'll fill you in on all the latest news and updates. So thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.